Hey everybody, how are you guys doing? I'm Eric Gerlach, and this is another talk about Daoism and Chinese philosophy. This is about holding no rank, Daoism, and anarchism. Anarchism is a topic as of late, and again, with people making claims about communism, fascism, anarchism, and a lot of things. While this is not a social political philosophy class right now, I am doing this Taoist lecture for a Buddhist philosophy class, and this will be relevant for an Asian philosophy class or an intro later. This is a talk about how the Taoists have been called anarchistic by many. In a certain sense, this is not necessarily modern anarchism versus, in the same way that Christian monks and Buddhist monks are very communist in many ways. That does not mean they are atheist communists, of course. So in a similar way, we are talking about how politically here, the anarchists are rather libertine, libertarian, anarchistic. I often say I am quite libertine and anarchistic in my political beliefs. That does not actually tell you not only if somebody's left or right, it actually doesn't tell you that they are like a modern left or right person. So when we are talking about a topic as sensitive as anarchy, which I have not yet a video here explaining what anarchy is and its history or its modern figures. The red and black flags that you sometimes see with Antifa are the twin liberal philosophies of the late 1800s of socialism and anarchism, which is the red flag and the black flag. Now, I will do videos in the future about Nietzsche versus Marx, mustache versus beard, anarchism versus communism. I'm going to do some of that next semester for modern political philosophy. Hey there, buddy. We're going to try to tame a tiger. Speaking of which, yes, tigers are anarchists. I have boxed him in, unfortunately. Hey, buddy. But yes, insofar as everyone is a bit libertine and anarchistic, and of course America is a bit libertine in many ways compared to many other cultures, we're not so much talking about signing up with whatever club membership newsletter I suppose people think Antifa has, as something, whether or not organization. But this is not signing up or not with modern anarchy or not. This is that the Taoists themselves are somewhat libertarians and anarchists, which you can take however you like. So that needs to be stated in the beginning, because putting anarchy in the title of the video. This is not meant to be a left-wing or right-wing video. This is meant to be how, if you would like, the anarchists are rather libertarian about things, to make it neither a left or a right thing. In fact, I don't know if it's appropriate to say that the Taoists are not necessarily, at least in their form in the Han and onward, progressive by necessarily our standards, but let's let that be, because we are talking about how these guys are libertine. So we have had, the last video that I gave was that the Taoists like acting the fool, and acting rather like Robin Hoods who are also jesters. Now, I like that plenty fine, all of that, and there is a bit of libertineness, so now we follow along to stories and points of the different Taoist thinkers interwoven together, as with the last couple of lectures. The last couple of talks are not about each particular Taoist thinker, you will notice, as far as they are thematically by points of, in a certain sense, lessons and life overall. Not principles, but forms of Taoist teachings. And holding no rank in anarchism is actually one of those points that we can make. I have been stringing out the points. This is the final point for now. I will make more videos about Taoism in the future, but I'm going to go on to make videos about Chinese Buddhism and Zen for the Buddhist and Asian philosophy classes here. So this is the final point of these moments about Taoism, and in the future I will make particular videos more about Chuang-Tzu, Lao-Tzu, and others. And Lietze, who's amazing, Tan Xiao, others. But we are told in the early verses of the Tao, which again, notice we're starting each of these teaching points with, that the wise like water take the lowest of positions and seek no pride. We do live in a bit of a narcissistic age. A lot of this Taoist wisdom will sound like narcissism and counter-narcissism in many ways, but a la modern terminology. Again, narcissism is sort of a modern word for self-centeredness, although I will, of course, allow psychologists to be speaking more technically about that term in all the ways they would like and practice. But the lowest of positions and seeking no pride, and because the wise are sort of non-narcissistic proud, Heraclitus says pride is the human disease in ancient Greece. He is quite Taoist, as mentioned in the videos about him. Because those who seek the lowest of positions are like water, they can do so much more for others, the wise can, without anyone thinking there is anything particular happening at all. We've had many teachings altogether that add up to that. It says in verse 66 of Wang Bi's arrangement of the codified Daoism, oceans and rivers rule small valley streams because they swim below them. The oceans and rivers swim beneath the streams. That is very much like the capillary level in a certain sense of Foucault, although sort of not. The wise lead in front by putting themselves last. They're above others, but speak lowly of themselves. They're on top, but others don't feel weighed down. I like that. They're being sort of carried along like that way, but everybody's like, doo-doo-doo, and they don't even notice that they're carrying anyone. Everyone in the world is happy to support them without getting tired of it. Notice the image of carrying the wise leader. Because they don't compete, no one can compete with them. Later verses of the Tao add the wise do not boast. That was an early bamboo verse of the earliest verses we have. And no. Later verses that were added into Wang Bi's final Han version add the wise do not boast and so are admired by everyone, do not want to shine and are thus brilliant and enlightened, don't want to shine, thus are inner illuminated, is the pun here. Not in a certain sense, notice not shining outward, but shining inward, and thus shining outward, oddly, for those who see the hidden and the manifest. That he does not seek excellence, that they do not seek excellence, and thus are exalted, and because they do not argue, no one can argue with them. And notice, no one can, because they don't compete, no one can compete with them. Because they don't argue, no one can argue with them. If you desire nothing, everything will flock to you, which is a wonder. I've used that expression before. I've actually mistakenly, I am embarrassed to say, thought that was Confucius before, because Confucius actually has a similar philosophy in ways to Daoism, plenty, and philosophers the whole world over have interesting similarities and differences in spite of their oppositions. There is I believe it is a later Neo-Confucian, possibly Song, I honestly forget, who says if there is something in Confucianism that says that you merely need to sit facing south and everything will take care of itself. It sounds very much in accord with and informed by this Taoist verse that if you have your ducks in a row and if you have slowly and patiently stacked your life and your arrangements and your familiarities with others such that you have things in accord simply and nicely, then everything is just coming your way a la bluebirds, because life just keeps giving you things as you have prepared for life. So life's just going to keep giving you stuff. Of course, this is kind of Sleeping Beauty again with the birds and the chipmunks up the arms again, which is anti-Shuangzi. It's like they'd flee from you in fear. And again, from The Simpsons, Homer is like, nature. And then he's in the shower. He's like, guys, could you give me a break for 5 minutes? It's like nature will flock to you, even whether or not you like chipmunks all up in your stuff. And the wise don't care for themselves and are safe, Of course, here there is irony, and of course they've taken care of things slowly such that they're really not needing to take care of themselves, which is the irony. But again, that is less caring. If you're less buying fancy stuff for yourself, you're less caring for yourself also. Although this could have other meanings other than just avoiding luxury, of course. Lao Tzu says that only he has obtained the high rank of a newborn baby that has not yet learned how to smile. I think this is the rank of general. Yes? Of high general, as in your everyone. There's a wonderful creepy image. Disturbingly, according to the legend, Lao Tzu's mother was pregnant for years and years, longer than the 9 months. It's labor and quite a long-term delivery. And then she gave birth to a tiny gray-bearded old sage baby, which probably would have creeped everybody out. I got a wonderful image online of a Taoist mural in a temple somewhere, which is, there's women bathing the bearded baby. Heraclitus says that if we are drunk as older people, we are more witless than a beardless child who would lead us home, which of course seems to mean a boy, as all girls are likely beardless. But yes, a beardless child, which of course is a gray-bearded baby. But you have in this, interestingly, that being an old baby means being super simple and solidly clear and simple and primary and primal in a way, such that you have returned to the beginning, a la the yin-yang, not even left it necessarily, but you have preserved sort of the power of openness and childhood and all of that. I am reading things as I read them. I am going to make a lot more videos about Alice in Wonderland soon because I have my theories about that I won't get into right here. But one of the things that makes Alice in Wonderland incredibly similar to Lao Tzu and Daoism is that it definitely seems that Alice is, whether or not she knows it, being asked by the characters who are trying all the times, plenty of them, are forcing her to preserve her childlikeness onward through adulthood. It definitely seems that Lewis Carroll, in the course of Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, wants children to remain, like himself, children into adulthood patiently. There is a lot here with being a bearded baby about remaining a child and a baby into adulthood patiently, being an uncarved block, being a childlike individual. And I would say, coming from a family who enjoys good surreal humor and all the richness of life, I would say that being like a child is a wonderful thing. I do highly recommend the book Eating Like a Child. I forget the author. It's a great book. But it's a fake book of morals, which is kind of an anti-moral book, but in that is laughing at how silly we all are as children and adults, and we're all kind of silly and kind of terrible people, which is a bit hippie Taoist immoralism. There's something like, but we're all kind of stupid, it's okay not to be immoral and elbow grandmothers into traffic, as always mentioned with Nietzsche. Being an immoralist with the Taoists or the Nietzscheans would be that, no, but if you stop caring so much, and if you have your ducks in a row, and if you like, simple trail mix and nature hikes, the Taoists talk as if you eat nothing but trail mix, you can effectively live forever, with or without sex, that everything will just simply flock to you, And yeah, whether or not you like the pigeon's presence. So the wise don't care for themselves, are safe, has it all, and they remain the bearded baby of Lao Tzu, which is just creepy for everyone, I think, So it says here also, true power is like a newborn baby. Their bones are weak, their muscles are soft, but their grip is strong. That puns, of course, on the grip of a baby, which is, of course, got your nose, got your finger, like with the baby holding onto your finger, which, of course, is baby's grip reflexes here in ancient China, with the brain and body remaining pretty much human for at least 100,000 years, but that you have not only the grip of the baby, but the grasp of the mind, which grasp of the hand is very metaphor. You can ask Lakoff and Johnson. Grasp of the hand is very much grasp of the mind across human cultures. You need not use the metaphor. Grasping a hand is very much conception or thought a lot. Not always, but a lot. So you have here that the grip of the baby is strong, which is the understanding is strong, and the form, the way with it, the grip, the grasp. Babies don't know about sex, but are always excited. That suggests a kind of inflation we will pass over a la economics. With more energy than anyone. Again, tense, excited, energy is sexual. And the babies have that all along, let's hope, completely pre-sexually. You can wrestle with 1800s, 1900s psychology about all that. They scream all day and keep their voice. Their voices don't wear out because they're so young and supple and not old and brittle. And they are most in harmony with everyone, meaning they scream all day at everybody, and babies are still more loved than anybody. That's a great pun. It's like, if you scream all day at a bus stop, people hate you. Babies scream, hopefully not on a plane, and they're living in a village, and they hear babies cry all the time, which I don't think people on a plane live with babies all the time in a village, because if they did, baby crying is nothing. If you're on a chicken bus, 3 babies crying and a goat, that's Thursday. It's like that Jewish... it's the Jewish legend of the immoral story of, you take the donkey and the horse out of your house. Yeah, no, everything's quiet as heck, suddenly. It's that sort of thing. Relativity. The babies scream all day and are more in harmony with everyone. They get to. Good for them. The Lietza says, the third, again, most important, we were just doing Verses of the Tao. The third most important Taoist text, the third Taoist master, Lietza, Master Lie, says, the text says, consequently, there are ways in which earth excels heaven, in which with the mother of all, there are ways in which the lower earth female is superior to the higher sky male, which again, already pointed out enough, is not as Abrahamic as other stuff. And ways in which there are ways in which earth and the lowly earth is higher than the heavens and the sky, and ways in which each thing is more intelligent than the sage. Now that's an open invitation not only to act the fool, but that's actually very humbling, and that's very lietza. Those passages come along with the guy laughing at the Duke about you'd be in a rice paddy with a bamboo hat on, partner, which we had in the last video. There are ways in which every single slave is smarter than the emperor, is what is suggested. Well, yay, and regardless of what you think of current political circumstances or slavery in whatever form, whenever age, it is very interesting and wise. Doesn't tell you it's anti-slavery, but does tell you if you see the lowest as somehow more brilliant than the emperor always, that is a wise, lower, higher point of view. A wide point of view, thus lower and higher with width. Heaven shapes but cannot support. It takes both heaven and earth, takes two to tango. When the sage is kind, other things must be strong. So the sage needs pushback. And when the sage is active, others are passive. It's, Confucius says, being a bit Taoist, Yan Hui is of no use to me. Everything I say pleases him. This is very much Socratean interlocutors. Yes, Socrates. Yes, Socrates. Oh, wow, Socrates. Just explain to me that idea, because I don't know how smart you are yet, Socrates. It's like, that doesn't get, and Confucius is like, these people are useless. I need pushback. I'm not perfect, even as the master. I need people to tell me I'm a jerk. Like, how the heck do I undo my jerkness 70 years into it? That's Confucius. If I don't have people telling me I'm a jerk already, they're all being nice to me. This is stupid. It's, again, they have in here, when the sage is kind, other things need to be strong and potentially mean, because how else are you going to push back on jerkness? Like, if there's always the jerks, according to the Egyptians and others, then how would kindness be without having jerks to push against? I saw somebody said something quite racist and terrible on Facebook, and somebody replied and said, and people clipped and shared on Facebook, "You are dirt, out of which I am a flower, which can grow," which is a wonderful Hallmark card, greeting to PO, anybody, your PO or otherwise, yeah, ways to laugh and cry all at the same time with all of this. So these are the circling ways of things that the wise accept easily and the rest can't. If you can see this in life in all different motions, you aren't far away from, well, continuing to be decently happy the way you are. Or at least there isn't anything closer, I think they would say. So this gets us to no rank, holding no rank, being silly, acting the fool, and seeing the sage and the emperor as equal in ways, or superior, inferior, alternately. That gets us along the way to anarchism, because there are a couple of moments in Daoism that actually, especially compared to Confucianism, seem rather anarchistic. We already had, of course, acting the fool. The emperor says, "Oh, I dreamed of a land where there are no..." the yellow emperor dreams of a land in the Liesa text in which there is no rulers and subjects, but oh, hey, I learned perfect bliss government, but by the way, I can't tell you advisors about it. Honest, it seems like a joke because he wants to stay emperor and get, the decent shish kebabs out of it. So you have here that there is already, we've covered several texts that sound rather anarchistic. You also have Zhuangzi saying, "I'm not going to go help you lead the state. I'm going to wriggle around in the mud like a tortoise," which definitely sounds like he likes being a hippie by the river and fishing rather than being a presidential advisor. But in suggesting simplicity in nature and the proper way to live, some have explicitly called Lao Tzu and others anarchists, early Chinese anarchists, but that would only be after we have anarchism as a word in the 1800s, which, love it or hate it, that became a word in the 1800s amongst Europeans who were in the later eras of the 1800s following the red and then red and black flags. This actually gets into, I have notes on anarchism online I have not put into video form. It actually has to do with the falling out between Marx and Bakunin and others. Bakunin, I mispronounce as best I can. And has to do with the red and black flags, and you can look that up or you can check out the notes. But we're not going to talk about much modern forms of anarchism or anything. All, again, we need to know is this is libertarianism somewhat on the right, anarchism by name on the left. It does seem like somewhat libertarians want you to get off their land, and the anarchists think we can all share sandwiches, such that it is somewhat libertarianism is anarchism, but there's a bit get off my land, I'm on my own versus but we can all share kind of lefty thing on the anarchist thing. And you could call get off my land or share the sandwiches foolish either way, I guess, and plenty there's times of life either. But regardless of how much you think you believe in libertarianism or leftist anarchism, which I guess you don't have to believe much in either, that's the point of both and or neither, is that you have here people saying that the Chinese are early anarchists. Anarchism is a hot topic, so hey, why the heck not? In the Zhuangzi, my favorite work of Chinese philosophy, he is the one who says, I'm not going to be an advisor. To the minister. I'm going to wriggle around in the mud and fish. I find it much happier and easier that way in warring states China, thank you very much, because I don't need to get clipped by a regime change next week. That the wise are often common people in the text. Woodcutters, fishermen, think of fishing, of course, with the gospel. Butchers, carpenters, ex-cons, and others of low status. The sort of people Jesus gathers and others. In two places, Zhuangzi mocks Confucius, or at least the text does, who praises two sages who have had their legs cut off for committing crimes. It's implied somebody with their leg cut off has had a leg or a hand struck off for a crime. It is the thing where I will just mention, if you think that we're the West so that China and Islam is bad with cutting off a hand or a foot, we'll remind cutting off a hand or a foot is nicer than just straight up execution for thievery. And actually the Middle Ages are full of a lot of China, Islam, and which is the West, the Middle East, and the East, killing people and or chopping off a hand or worse for stealing an apple or two. So how draconian, of course, and all I want to say is not that anybody should approve of draconian punishment or not. I do see all the time people seem to think that China and Islam, the East and the Middle East, are into torture and into vicious punishment. I always want to point out at this point in the text, not that I think China and Chinese people are nicer than humanity at all, but simply, regardless of your feelings, that, at a time when Islam was cutting off a hand or not, which sometimes makes its way into the Aladdin show, that they are actually breaking people on the wheel at the time in Europe. And I'm not going to argue that means Europeans are more or less brutal than Muslims, but being broken on the wheel is a lot worse than losing a hand, and you can look that up. But yes, basically what we find in the text is there are convicts who have lost a foot because they have committed a decent enough crime, that they had a leg cut off, which means they are a symbol to the community. They're not going to be killed. They're going to have a leg cut off, and now you get to probably beg or something because you've had a leg cut off, and you get to sit there, as a part of the community, and maybe somebody helps you out, your family, others. But you are a symbol to everybody, and a mark. You are not a mark, a sucker necessarily, but you are, you're a living example. And two of these guys who have had feet cut off, they have more followers than Confucius. This is clearly the Taoists screwing with the Confucians in the text at a time when the Taoists are debating the Confucians as opponents. So they're mocking the Confucians with tongue-in-cheek, knowing they mock it or not, and saying Confucius is faced with the fact in the text of this Taoist text, with the fact their enemy, their opponent in argument, where he says that there are these two people who have had their feet cut off, and they have more followers than him as philosophers and as sages. And they're asked, so wait, the master, by Confucians, who are his followers, he's asked, why do these guys are more popular than you? You're a sage, they're criminals. And of course, what they're doing, a la Jesus hanging out with criminals and prostitutes, is that Confucius himself, who seems to slam himself several times, not in the Confucius text, he's humble, but in the Taoist text, he basically says, oh, we're dumb. The Taoists are right. Well, why would you? That's sort of like having Muhammad in a Christian text, later text, be like, you know what? I'm wrong. The Christians are right. It's like, well, why would they do that? And there are merrily mocking life and being silly and acting the fool as they do this, which many people would say this is them openly inviting you to understand this is fiction in ancient China, but you can believe all sorts of things, and people do. They would have taken it literally and not. And they know what metaphors are all across the ancient world, and fictional examples. People that are, and people are people. Still, yes. So Confucius actually says that's because these guys are smarter than me and they're better people. Well, he probably never said that ever, but or might just in passing be like, but like these guys may never have existed. But what the Taoists are here suggesting is that there's Taoists who were criminals, are reformed now possibly, or wrongly accused, who knows? But they have a more following than Confucius because even though they're criminals and outcasts, they're actually wiser people than him, and even Confucius has to acknowledge it. Well, this story almost possibly never happened, at least out of the mouth of Confucius in the Taoist text. And were they there to report on it, with the recorder? But this is definitely saying the worst of criminals can be better than Confucius. Which again, you have Jesus hanging out, say, with criminals and lepers in the Middle Eastern and Western traditions. I always point out, West, Middle East, East here, which isn't hard divisions. Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, etc. And so you have here, again, in the Eastern tradition, the lowliest of criminals can be the better people. And then again, what does that go on to affect in Western or Eastern culture? Maybe some, maybe little, maybe much. And again, we can think about this and say what we like. So the Liesa says that when things are properly working, there is no need for the distinction of ruler and subject. And each individual can pursue what they want for themselves, almost like it's a Waldorf school or John Dewey's whole idea of America and American education. Everybody can just pursue what they want for themselves without harming or crossing anyone else. Waldorf schools, another John Dewey's idea of education, by the way, which is super progressive and stuff, is every little Jimmy can study chemistry or not since kindergarten, or art or not, however little Jimmy wants. He doesn't have to take science. He doesn't have to take art. I personally think, if people were free to take as much or little religion as they like, that's a serious thing, which we won't probably see for a long time. Of course, I saw a piece that did say religious divisions are even more powerful on people than racial prejudice, and racial prejudice is very powerful on people. So religion, if you think, if Latinx people and black people in America suffer racial discrimination, and they do, those are Christians. You know what I mean? Like, that's powerful, regardless of what one wants to say beyond that, and I'm going to leave that where it is. Racial prejudice is very serious, and kills people. Religious prejudice is even worse, which is one of the reasons why I am trying to teach these classes, because all we need to do is somewhat see people are human, and then that will hopefully somewhat, not categorically, but somewhat influence our behavior. And so we have here, honestly, Liesa saying that we could all live in a hippie commune without any real rules, man, very much in ancient China and this is printed and read during the Han, not printed, but rewritten and copied, not yet printed in China, where printing comes from, block printing, etc. But they are doing this they are saying this in Han China, when you already have a decent empires. Kropotkin, the founder of modern anarchism, and Ursula K. Le Guin, who went to Berkeley High from this town, that's a block pretty much away from here, the famed science fiction author, both argue that Lao Tzu was an anarchist very much like themselves. Ursula K. Le Guin, Left Hand of Darkness, I recommend that book, read it, and excellent sci-fi teacher in high school who taught us so much. And Ursula K. Le Guin's work is fantastic. She is a somewhat Berkeleyan, somewhat Taoist, somewhat anarchist, I do not believe, yes. And her work is seminal for science fiction. In fact, you have been seeing, people who are saying that science fiction is way too lefty and into alternate voices and such. Ursula K. Le Guin, whether or not you believe that, Ursula K. Le Guin was one of the fundamental people who sent science fiction towards the directions it is now. In some people's minds, not mine, a little too lefty. It's possible to jump on bandwagons, do things, in poor ways, but I definitely don't think science fiction, and other things is exhausted of either right or left-wing themes or anything like that. But Ursula K. Le Guin herself was somewhat a Taoist, somewhat an anarchist, somewhat a science fiction genius. And yeah, she pushed science fiction somewhat towards where we are. And so when we talk about Taoism and anarchism, may as well mention, someone from this town here, Ursula K. Le Guin. Again, Left Hand of Darkness, once you understand she's a bit of a Taoist, I've heard The Lathe of Heaven is excellent. I have not read it, but Left Hand of Darkness I had to read in high school, and that was excellent. You get the Taoism anarchist angle a little bit once you know it's in there. And again, this is sort of hippies, That's sort of this area of the Bay. Yes, we are Bay Aryans, the Bay Aryan nation, yes? And Le Guin, myself, are somewhat Bay Aryans. So, if that's a thing. So the Bamboo Lao Tzu, who are into Chinese thought, and into teaching people Taoism, So, hey, let's spread the news. The Bamboo Lao Tzu says that work is best when it works for everyone equally, and everyone thinks that they equally did the work. And so the best rulers are unknown. The next best are loved. It's actually better to be underground cool than to have fame and be loved here for the rock star or the politician or the wise sage who should be ruling the village without anybody knowing it. Would be best. Next best would be to be a loved leader. You don't even want to be a loved leader who's out because that's second best. But that's better than those who are feared, which is third best, and the worst are fought. Notice, of course, if you're being fought as a leader, maybe you're sticking up for somebody, but at the same time, it would be better to not even be an apparent leader. And then next worst is being loved by everyone. That's wonderfully ironic, and there's so much in Taoism which is directly trying to contradict our senses and our instincts in order to get us to turn ourselves around fully in the duck rabbit here. More laws, knowledge, and control lead to more outlaws, unknowns, and chaos, verse 57 of the Tao says. We cannot make others fear wrong without being feared and fearing ourselves, which is why pride and shame are scary and don't work well. I was actually ranting to myself about political things I see online before making this, and I won't get into the particular examples because I won't stop. But be very careful about glow. The Taoists say don't go into battle, as if it's gloating. Go in as if it's a funeral. And right now, especially with all the, let's just say without getting into any particular examples or any more politics, that gloating, when you win or when you have taken points off the other side, of course, be careful about gloating and being too happy taking points from the other side, because it looks wonderful to you, but you are burning your arrows and it looks horrible to them. And it's very subtle. You won't notice it. But when you win, you should be solemn, which I think actually, many people would say much now is not such a win on both sides. But when you're all frustrated with it, be careful about being so happy about taking a brownie point or two from the other, because a lot of times you don't want to be too happy, about taking one or two away of the other, because feels nice in the moment. Overall, that even sows division in your own ranks. I have to say nowadays. I, again, will get out of my skull on this one. But honestly, gloating in battle, you would think you're shoring up your side. What you're doing is you're cheapening your own view of yourself and humanity in your own head, such that now you have to fear people backstabbing yourself. If you go around backstabbing the enemy as if they're not human beings, you may think to yourself, I'm being strong for my kind. Now you have to fear being now you're going to have a view of humanity. You deal with your friends and your family more than you deal with your foes personally, in your head and in your life. So if you go around backstabbing people and being a jerk to the enemy, it may seem strong, but what you're doing is turning yourself into the kind of person who suspects your own of doing anything, and now you have to play that game in your head. It's very much PTSD. If you cheapen, I think Grossman in On Killing says, if you cheapen the enemy's life, you cheapen your life in your own head. So you need to be careful. That's all I'll say here, but I am feeling a little political nowadays. But I always try to teach these classes without taking necessarily a left or a right tack, but being able to use examples easily. And without actually using examples easily right now, I will say it is best to constantly reflect upon the human from both sides than to gloat at winning on a side. That is always true. Unfortunately, it's always true because it's always true and not true, in how we feel and how we act. Otherwise, these words would not make any sense to us at all, nowadays. Oh yeah, I remember when we got over all of that, yeah. So strength and order are for war, funerals, and bad times. This is the verses right here. I'm glad I know me well enough. A lot of times in class I get to ranting about things like here, and then I'm like, oh, I put the verses right here. Well, that's good of me. I planned ahead for me. I love that guy, though I don't trust him entirely, If you got to deal with family and friends, I guess you distrust you more than anybody else. And as Wittgenstein says, you don't even have to watch your hands or your mouth to figure out what you're going to do next, or like look at your eyes or anything. You can't. You look in a mirror, you're like, which way am I looking? Maybe I'm looking at something awful. Nah, you don't have. You got to look at others, though, all the time, suspect their hands and eyes of doing something. So when we must use war and violence, use surprise, as Sun Tzu says again and again. Very Taoist metaphors like water say stay fluid and unknown to your enemy. Less war is ruling best. The wise use weapons quietly when they have no choice but to take life. The warlike can never have what they want. That is very much, today I saw a thing or two, and it's like, it very much go to war as if it is a funeral. Go to winning as if it is a funeral. You are solemn. You are not smiling. You are solemn. And the warlike can never have peace at home and have what they want. That is not even about foreign policy. It is. That is about if you are the kind of person who really has to use aggression a lot and use a sledgehammer to swat a fly a lot in life, you bring that home and hang it over your bed. You are bringing your own skull everywhere you go, and if you get too warlike, it feels good to do it to the enemy, and then you waltz right back into your home with all the post-traumatic stress and the attitude problems and all of that. All you gotta do is feel as much for your enemy as possible, and the easiest moves to win as effectively as possible without screaming at people, and then being the kind of person who likes to scream at people, and now having to live in your home with that kind of person, which is you. You can't even watch your own hands to trust yourself like you can others. So so what are you gonna do with that? And they don't trust you if you're screaming at them, so now you can't watch their hands, they're out of the room, To cut at what's complete, to add to life, is waging war with force. So those are some of the verses from the Tao, and then that is, from the Tai Shen Shu, if I'm getting that right, I hope. Aikido, the Japanese martial art that uses the force of opponents to defeat the opponent. Aikido is mixed up with Japanese nationalism a little bit. It has an interesting history that is controversial, but I grew up in a family that's somewhat 60s, and I have folks, my dad and uncle are into Aikido. My uncle has a black belt in Aikido. That's it. And I used to like to try to jump at him off of couches when I was a tiny person. And in Aikido, of course, famously, Aikido, you don't punch and kick so much as you do get people into locks, but you more use their momentum against them. And that's the whole thing. And it is thoroughly, possibly one of the most Taoist and Sun Tzu art of war martial arts forms ever. And again, that would not be accidental. Yeah, accidentally, people who are way into Taoism and art of war happened to invent, the guy and everyone. I forget the guy who founded its name, sadly. Yeah, that's, or put it in the notes ahead of time. Again, I don't trust that guy. Is that rolling with the punches and throwing your opponent with their own momentum. Oh, you want to punch me? Oh, well, I wouldn't do your fist such an indignity of standing in front of it. Oh, look, you're on the ground. Well, that was accidental. That would be Taoist as heck. And doing that really well would be not only Taoist, but Sun Tzu art of war is that important a martial arts strategy. Not in the slightest, in China and Japan. Never read it. That's not entirely true. Again, we were like brothers. Again, if your opponent wants to punch in any particular direction, again, go ahead. So it's very, very, and that also is very, remember the Japanese story I told of the father and his three sons, is that is Aikido is walking into the situation, seeing the pillows on the door, rather than blasting it up, apart with the sword and the chainsaw noises, as I like to do. It says here, raise everyone, feed everyone, be a leader, not a butcher, is what the Tao Te Ching says. When we follow the way, there is no loyalty, justice, or good leaders. When we don't follow the way, there is loyalty and disloyalty, justice and injustice, and good and bad leaders. Verse 18. When the Tao rules on earth, racehorses are used to pull dung carts, are used to pull crap wagons, let's say nicely. When the Tao has been lost on earth, war horses are raised on green fields. I'm going to repeat that line. We're running along in the time already. We only have another verse or 3 here. But when the Tao has been lost, when the Tao rules on earth, when we are in accord with the way of nature and society is actually being a bit more natural, racehorses are used, the finest of horses are used to pull garbage trucks and dung heaps. You may say, my God, why would the best of sports cars be used to drive garbage around? Because from kind of an anarchistic libertarian angle, perhaps more anarchist than libertarian here, but let's, leave that aside. If you are living very, very simply, then one of your simplest needs is hauling crap around and using it as fertilizer, which they suggest, and other things like that. So if you are living in a society where plumbing is one of the most important things, here, of course, I am thinking Zangief stage Soviet Union a bit, but if you are living in a society, not to be, yes, that's where society's perfect, if you are living in a society where plumbing is one of the most important things you have to deal with, the Taoists are suggesting that's a very harmonious society. Because everything else apparently is going great. That's the point. It is meant to sound like a joke and ironic, but it is, if racehorses, the finest of thoroughbreds, if the Kentucky Derby racehorses are being used to pull garbage trucks, wow, you must have it great, is the ironic thing that's being told to ancient Chinese and we can be modern, whomever, people. But when we're out of touch with the way war horses are raised on green fields, now that actually sounds amazing. That's like great cars are put in the Indy 500. Sounds amazing, but the problem is, those are used in what must be vicious battles, and they're going to be blown up and or killed as they are fighting the battles, which means it implies, along with the other Taoist texts, the finest of Kentucky Derby horses will be spent and wasted and die in war. You will have the tallest of trees cut down for Zhuangzi. Along with the other verses, it makes a lot of sense. At first it sounds, war horses are raised in green. Let's not be in accord with the Tao. No, they are meant to say war horses. You can think of a duke being like, But I look upon my war horses raised on green fields, these Kentucky thoroughbreds, as beautiful. And yes, but that's because things are screwed up and we're not being all anarchistic and we're being a bit too authoritarian, which is why only few people have war horses raised on green fields, and then those same rich people are spending their war horses, throwing them directly into battle, and we're burning through our finest war horses as the wealthiest and smartest of people, which is stupid. Like, that is, again, what they are getting at. If you see rank, you hand yourself a trial and punishment. Verse of 9. That is not only if you see distinction in life, you are handing yourself judgments and convictions of yourself in your own skull, but it also means, and the language puns on, if you go around trying to summon, if you go around trying to throw summons at people legally, you're going to get hauled into court a lot. It has the trial of the self, of course, is Anubis and the pearly gates. Again, the right answer was Mormons. You can all go now. Is that, the rest of you can just leave. A la South Park. That if you go around judging Mormons and other people, or people with their feet cut off, that you are handing yourself your judgments of yourself, because now you're going to always be afraid of losing your foot or Mormonism. So yes, like that if you judge, then if you judge not, you judge less. If you judge yourself. Which is very psychologically true and very core to world religions. Remember, regardless of what you think about religion, it was used to build empire internationally the world over. This as well. And people, that's because they dig it. Dig into it. Be cheap to rule and serve. Prepared for all. Always gaining in all things, and have a self without limits. Seek and save less for less loss. Don't worry about holding on to things. This is very minimalism. Anarchism, minimalism, minarchism. Holding on to things as your ancestors. Don't worry about holding on to things and hoarders, as your ancestors will keep up the sacrifices. That is a wonderful double meaning, because of course it means your ancestors will continue to be traditional and feed the spirits, but it also means because if we are just decent, lowly human beings, our offspring will continue to sacrifice themselves in the noble ways of humanity, and we will remain human. So if we remain simple and humble and human, the future generations will humble themselves and sacrifice themselves because they are simply human. If we're just decently human, then the future generations we do not even control will be humble and human like us, and we barely need to hold on to anything in order to have them act humanely like we can ourselves. There's a wonderful, your ancestors will keep up the sacrifices. Don't worry. There's a way of reading that conservatively, as with a lot of these things. There's a way of reading that traditionally, and then there's a way of not just reading it progressively as much as philosophically. And here I don't mean it's left-wing to be philosophical. I mean there's a way of reading it as, well, we're preserving our particular thing as the sacrifices. And then also in a lot of these religions and metaphors and modern phrasings, there's ways that doubles, as that it's not just your traditions, it's that the future of humanity is human and is quite solid and safe as long as you are sacrificing and you are humbling yourself. If you give to others, others will follow you in giving to others and continue the ancient ways of doing things for all and everyone. Tan Xiao, we're going to finish with a Tan Xiao and a Zhuangzi here. Tan Xiao of the Tang, I believe, of Dynasty, says that there are 7 ripoffs. Think about modern, if you think the Chinese culture is authoritarian, I teach people a lot of Chinese philosophy and Greek philosophy and say these things are authoritarian or anarchistic, libertarian, democratic, depending on which part of it you want to sniff over. So, Tan Qiao, think about this, in Tang Dynasty China, around the year 800 or so, says there are 7 ripoffs, 7 cons. Ways we are cheated, all cheated, since food is the most important thing. But kings take one part, the government, aristocrats take another, the wealthy, and the army, war, artists, merchants, and clergy take part, naming both the Taoists and Buddhists, from rich and lean harvest both. Now, he basically called out everyone. That's kind of calling out academia, the wealthy, the government, the artists. It calls out everybody, and it says they all take their cut for themselves out of society, whether or not we're having a thick, healthy harvest or a lean, thin harvest, they still get their cut. Now, if there's a lot of peasants, He named everybody very much except for the peasants and said everybody of any kind of distinction. And here we're blending definitely left and right wing, sort of forms of authority, enjoyable institutions, etc. All these guys get their cut, whether or not we have a good economy or a bad economy. They get their cut each and every fiscal quarter, don't they? So, given that, and those are that's keeping up the sacrifices, all right, in there, keeping up the ripoffs. Notice he's calling and he says the Taoists and the Buddhists. As a Taoist in Taoist Buddhist, the empires, actually at this point in the Tong, the emperors have stopped patronizing Confucianism as much like the Han, and they are switching over to Buddhism and Taoism, which are competing for patronage. So he says, as a Taoist competing for wealthy patronage, don't the wealthy and the Buddhists and the Taoists kind of rip you off? This is the kind of thing where people cherry pick an example from Greece or Europe and they're like, my God, it's freedom culture. It's like, yeah, human beings are smart enough to be free and then slaves and then free and then slaves. It's not a Western or an Eastern thing plenty, because I can clip out moments of Chinese philosophy that are amazingly contradicting authority. It's like, wow. And then all Chinese people continued to be anti-authoritarian. It's like, obviously, yeah, there's long rants again in Greek philosophy about how democratic they are or not. Well, this is anarchistic as heck. Does that make China an anarchistic culture? Not according to most Americans today. So again, much love, and for America, China, and everyone as I say that, of course. Not trying to take sides, but we do take sides, and we do all of that, don't we? He says people wear burlap just after completing silk. Think about how you get your paycheck. That's what he's saying. And eat chestnuts when the harvest just ended. What he means is you get your paycheck, you spend it in a week, now you got to eat frozen dinners, you know what I mean? Or cheap food for the next 2 weeks or 3. That's never happened to any Americans at all. You got to stretch your paycheck out because you blow it all immediately, sometimes on plenty of stupid things. That's how the ancient Chinese behaved. I can't understand it. So Tan says more punishment and police lead to more anger and crime. I'm a bit lefty. I'll leave that again to the activists. How can those who take the people's food, Tan Chiao says, repay them by fussing over love and duty? If we're not feeding and housing people, how can anybody fuss over ideal words and programs and other stuff from any sort of side of things? If we're feeding the stomach, we can empty the mind of ideas, and we can all be dumb as an uncarved block. And we can all have war horses do plumbing, help with the plumbing, because because instead of that, we have loved leaders on either side talking about love, duty, and a lot of other empty concepts. The Taoists say the only reason that would happen is because people are hungry and can't get work. It's like that's why people would be talking about duty. It's not what Confucius says. That is what the Taoists say, because they, again, are a bit countercultural and anarchistic. So it does suggest also, start with love. I'm going to cap this off at the end here. Remember, I have been saying a couple videos ago, the Taoists do say start with openness, complement it with strength, and then you have closure. Start with openness and kind of anarchistic equality. You then complement it with growing things together as little as possible such that everybody has something, and then you can balance it. Start with love, balance it with a bit of duty if you need to. And you don't need much politics, police, or ranks, and you can just kind of live as equals. If this does sound unreasonable politically, of course, this could be personal and amongst your friends or family or not, or political, or worldly, or what have you. And the Confucians and Taoists would understand it's the self, it's the family, it's the different levels of Plato's Republic and the nesting Russian dolls of life. So finally here, we'll cap off here. In the Zhuangzi, Qin Wu tells Lien Shu that he has heard talk of a holy sage, this could be Liezi himself, living on a mountaintop, again, hippie bum, who is gentle and shy like a young girl. As again, this Taoist male sage is timid like a young girl. He's like, sits on hands in marshmallow experiment. Does not eat anything but drinks dew. Doesn't eat marshmallow. Rides a dragon through the sky, like a boss. And can protect people and animals from illness. I love this line. It's like he's timid like a little girl, drinks dew, rides a dragon through the sky, and can cure people magically of disease. It's like, well, that's quite a report, isn't it? Qian Wu says this is all clearly insane. If you think people in ancient China are like, oh, I just heard of a mountain man. That's clearly true. This guy, no, they debate accounts of whether or not this wizard is really whatever they're talking about because they know people lie and they know that people are wrong about things. It's not that ancient cultures thought people are just right about things whenever they mention unicorns or gods. So he says, this is all clearly insane, and I refuse to believe any of this story, although I probably believe other stories similar. Lien Shu says we cannot expect a blind man to appreciate beautiful patterns or the deaf to listen to bells and drums. And blindness and deafness are not in the body alone. They're in the mind. The understanding has them too, as your words have just shown. Your words, your understanding, your words' mind is all interrelated in the ancient world. This man, this sage, who's timid like a young girl and rides a boss dragon through the sky, is about to embrace the 10,000 things, all the particulars, 10 times 10 times itself, and roll them all into one. That said, yes, that is going to conclude this semester's lessons on Daoism, and I am going to get to making some videos on Zen. I also have to make some videos on Plato for the Greek class and Aristotle and Stoicism and other things to close that out. There will also be videos on Greek skepticism, which I will be for the Greek class. If you're interested in the connections of Greek philosophy and Daoism, I will be mentioning more about that in the videos about Greek skepticism. Sextus Empiricus, who was not an ancient Roman porn star, and yes, we'll get to all of that as we get to all of that. So much happiness to everyone. Again, have a glorious day, night, and recurring of the same, and I will see you if I see you.